Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start my final presentation with a scriptural quote that I think is going to summarize why I chose the topic that I chose and how important it is. Behold how good and how pleasing if brothers could sit together in unity. Psalms 133:1. That sums up the Jewish contribution to the American Revolution. A very small minority that took a very large participatory role in a struggle that would see them finally recognize a country where they could have the religious, political, and other liberties that they had been denied for so long. So, how prevalent was Judaism in the 1770s? Work by Stark and Fink suggests that there were about 5 major identified synagogues in the colonies in the period of 1775 and 76. You also include smaller communities where people held services in their homes or in small local areas that are not necessarily recognized synagogues. But we look at the overall population, it's about 0.2%. So that represents between 4,800 and 5,000 people out of a population of 2.4 million. And yet they were willing to step into the gap, and participate however they could for their new adopted homeland. So where were the Jews found during the colonial period? Primarily 5 areas: New York, Philadelphia, Newport, Rhode Island, Charlestown, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia, both of which are important from the prospect of the shipping, mercantile, import, export, and financial business. New York and Philadelphia, of course, as the centers of government and credit finance, makes sense. But Charlestown and Savannah cannot be underestimated for their contributions to the war effort. Disproportionately, we will find that Jewish participants in the Revolutionary War were involved in the mercantile trades and in the financial services when compared to the median population of the colonies. So why would Jews choose to participate? Most of the Jews that had come to America had come from communities in modern-day Eastern and Central Europe. They were in a diaspora. They were legally, religiously, economically, and politically repressed. Anything from being restricted as to where they could live to not being able to publicly proclaim their faith, in some cases having to wear distinctive clothing, being forbidden from owning arms, being forbidden from participating in the martial processes, being denied most civil liberties, in fact being in general second or lower class citizens. In the Americas, they took great pride in promoting their participation in the fabric of the religious society of the day. I think we can all agree that the Americas, at the time of the Revolution, had just come out of the First Great Awakening and were extremely aware of not only a religious connection to the Father, but the idea of overt exhortations of that faith. Sarna points out that the Jews took scrupulous care to display their loyalty through energetic participation in government-ordained religious holidays, days of fasting, and days of prayer. They wanted to be seen as included and working within the framework and publicly professing their faith and belief. So, when a Jew would serve in the military, of course, there are some unique dietary and even holiday workday restrictions. We find first-hand accounts of accommodation for those needs. In fact, the minutes of the New York Committee on Safety in 1776 point out that Private Hart Jacobs could not have duty on Friday evenings because it was part of the Jewish Shabbat, and it was simply ordered, without fanfare, that he be excused from duty on Fridays, but every other night of the week be required to be present for duty and fully participate. Several different instances in the literature show that this was a common practice. At Valley Forge, General Washington is believed to have become more directly exposed to Judaism. He certainly knew who Jews were. He knew Jews who participated with them. But the presence of Jews in the army, the account is secondhand, but is repeated in multiple sources. So personally, I believe something of the incident did occur. Loosely at the Valley Forge 77 to 78 winter, Washington encountered a Polish soldier who was a Jew celebrating Hanukkah and lighting a menorah. And he took time to speak to the young soldier and gain some understanding as to the significance of the menorah and the Hanukkah holiday. Washington would repeat this story numerous times, but it is interesting that the commander would take time to look at something so obviously religiously different, and even something that might have been considered perverse to some, who were participating in the revolutionary effort for American freedom. So it consists of a couple of individuals I'd like to talk about, the first of whom is Haym Salomon. So Haym Salomon could be considered the financier of the American Revolution. First of all, he was a very senior member of the New York branch of the Sons of Liberty. The British arrested him twice. He was incarcerated for 18 months on the prison barges, where part of the time he served as an interpreter between the Hessian mercenaries and the colonial captives, using his Yiddish language skills. He was paroled, promptly began to agitate for revolution again, and was arrested a second time, and this time sentenced to death. He was able to escape and get to Philadelphia, where he began to work immediately with Robert Morris, who was the financier for the colonies. Throughout the war, Salomon would reach into his own fortune, his family's finances, reach out to his close friends, synagogue members, business associates, to come up with monies in kind. He developed systems of credit paper, bonds, and exchangeable notes to further finance the war effort. And in reaching out to the larger Jewish community, was significant in raising large sums of money to support the effort. This came to a head during the Battle of Yorktown at the siege, when Robert Morris had to inform General Washington that the treasury was empty. There was no money to pay for the continued operations. Washington simply dashed a note back that said, "Send for Haym Salomon." Almost immediately, Salomon was able to produce $20,000 of his own money, reached out to his community of financiers and others, raised an additional $1 million, and they matched a one-time donation in kind from Robert Morris of $1.4 million, and quite literally financed the initial stages of the campaign at Yorktown, so that the army was able to buy even the most basic supplies that they needed. This was repeated throughout the colonies. Mordecai Shaftal was a prominent member of the Jewish community in Savannah, Georgia. He was a merchant. He owned shipping interests, financial interests. He helped set up a network of smugglers to bring in products from the West Indies and Antigua in such large quantities that the British actually launched a punitive expedition against the islands in an effort to stop the flow of supplies in. Mordecai Shaftal would also serve as a colonel and as the deputy commissary for the Carolinas and Georgia during the Cornwallis campaigns in the South. So a hugely significant and prominent role, again, and an open attestation of his faith. Next, we can talk about Rabbi Gershom Mendes Siexis. Excuse me. The rabbi was responsible for advocating strongly for religious liberties and tolerance, especially in Philadelphia. He would later participate not only in the debates as to the inclusion of the religious liberties in the Pennsylvania Constitution, but he would work closely with Washington's inauguration, and even go on to be one of the co-founders of what became Columbia University. He strongly advocated for individual liberty and religious liberty, and wrote not only within the Jewish community, but in the greater ecumenical community of the colonies, and was seen as a voice for religious tolerance and religious freedom. The last young man I'd like to talk about is David Franks. He had a very interesting career. Mr. Franks was a non-practicing Jew who moved from Quebec, Canada, back to Philadelphia at the beginning of the war. After his treatment for being a Jew at the hands of the British, he began to not only support the American effort, but to reconnect with his Jewish faith. As a young officer, he was assigned to the staff of Benedict Arnold. He would rise to be Benedict Arnold's aide-de-camp at the time of the treason at West Point. He would be exonerated in that investigation. However, rumors would continue to dog him. So he demanded a full court-martial. And that court-martial would later not only exonerate him, but fully clear his name. Washington promoted him to become one of his aides and actually entrusted him, Franks, to transport classified documents and dispatches back and forth to Europe using the family's connections in the mercantile industry between Benjamin Franklin and John Jay, and later would entrust young Mr. Franks with carrying the copy of the peace treaty to Benjamin Franklin in Paris to see it executed in the war and guarantee American independence. So overall, the Jewish contribution to the war probably cannot be underestimated. They certainly participated in ways and in roles that far exceeded their percentage of the population. And more importantly, throughout the literature, the consistent theme is they did it for a sense of participating in religious liberty, participating in the freedom of expression, and owning a piece of the governance for the country they had chosen to call their own. They gave of their own finances, of their family's finances. They staked personal fortune and reputation without the expectation of being ever recompensed or fully made whole for those outlays and expenditures, and in fact only expressed pride at identifying that they had participated in the beginnings of the birth of a nation. So again, I'd like to close as I started by saying, Hine matav umanarim shevet achim gam yachad. Behold how good and how pleasing if brothers could sit together in unity. And that is the Jewish contribution to the American Revolution. Thank you.